make art about India, but or about the Indian experience, but I think it's important to acknowledge where I was born and why that helped, why that influences things a little bit. So, and the time that I was born. So I was born in 1989, which was just around the cusp of like when India's economy liberalized. And so before that, we were a socialist country, and so we had everything was owned by most of the things were owned by the government, and we had very few of some things. Like if you wanted to buy shoes, you could buy two kinds of shoes. If you wanted to buy biscuits, which are cookies here, yeah. If you wanted to buy biscuits, you could buy like two kinds, like one with sugar on it and one with like chocolate inside. And like those were the only options. And everything we just had very little of everything. And it was, even if you were wealthy or if you didn't have much, you would all have access to the same number of things. And so you could not like really show your wealth. Like when I was in school, if somebody had like a really fancy pencil box where you could like press buttons and like things would pop open, your teacher would tell you to never bring it back to school again, because you would make other people feel bad, like that they don't have what you have. And everybody had to have the same kind of backpack, everybody had to have the same kind of pen. So we all had we had to look identical, and so that there would be no display of wealth, because many people didn't have enough. And then so in the 90s, suddenly our economy opened up and we had all these like different materials come in and different kinds of things that you could eat, and suddenly you could buy people could go abroad, because before that we had a limited number of dollars. So if you wanted to go to the US, you could only have a certain number of dollars that the government you could exchange, and so you could only buy a certain number of things. So you couldn't just like go and buy whatever you wanted. And so people would suddenly go abroad, and you would bring back like Hershey's like chocolate syrup, and we would like ration that over all our birthdays, like over the entire year, because that's the only time you have ice cream. So this sounds like really, it's not poverty at all. It was a great childhood, but we had, everything was rationed. And so people became used to like really using things very sparingly. If your shoes got ruined, then you went to the cobbler. If your clothes had a hole, you went to the tailor. And so you have this whole kind of lifestyle, and then suddenly things begin to come in, objects begin to come in, and we begin to have more of everything. You see, we went from having 6 channels on our TV when I was 5 to having like 100, more than 100 when I was 10, 11. But the habit of keeping things and like not wasting them and just using them over and over, that stayed. So I think it was like a generation of hoarders, like automatically, because you see value in material, and at the same time you have access to a lot of material, and you can't like throw anything away because you know that all of it is so valuable. So we just have we went from having like very spare homes with nothing in it to like extremely like full homes where everything is wrapped in plastic because you're trying to make it last longer and longer. And so that's like what I grew into, and that I think has stayed with me now, that I can't seem to let go of any material, and so sculpture became like a very easy way to sort of like an outlet for all the things that I was collecting, and with fabric, and like when I think I'm the first generation of Indian women who don't know how to make things with our hands. And so my grandmother knew it, my mother knew it, and my mother had access to an education. She could choose a career she wanted. And so when I was growing up, we thought that cooking and weaving and stitching, these were things you did if you didn't have a choice. So if you were a liberal woman with options, with freedom, you would not stitch, you would not cook. And so this was just something that was going away. Like it was something only craftsmen did. And by coming here, when I came here, I saw a thrift store for the first time in my life. Like, that people could have enough objects that they could give it away. Or that you could have so much, you could have so many cups in your kitchen that you can actually donate some. Or you have so many clothes, or you have so many shoes that actually have their soles intact and you can still give it away. And I saw that, and it was like the reverse of how collecting was happening in India, like how you collect objects and these vast like spaces with so many things. And so sort of that combined with how much I love objects, and I think that's where my love for like abundance comes from. And I try and these are all experiments. I don't think they're successful experiments, but they're all like experiments in trying to show what abundance is in a certain space that can like change the way a space is. So like instead of putting an object in a place where the object is living inside the space, like for the object to take over that space and become that space. So when you're entering that becomes a location. The location completely changes. So I think when my work is successful, like when I maybe as I keep doing it, that's what it would do, like make a new location. And how I go about it, so I have like lots of different interests, but fashion is one of them. And so when I was in art school at CCAD, I felt that if I was interested in fashion, I couldn't be a fine artist because I thought it was a shallow interest, to be interested in only the surface. It was a very foolish idea. And I also knew that I couldn't make, like, as much as I loved clothing, I couldn't make it. So I started taking a fashion class at the same time as I took my first sculpture class. And so then I started using the materials that I found in my fashion class, like all the spare fabric lying around, and I use them in my sculptures. And so I started making like sculptures out of cloth. And so I did that for a while, and they were kind of abstract because I didn't want to make something that looked like anything so that you could like immediately say, oh, this is about this. I didn't want it to be so easy. And I was the other things. So abundance is one, and the other thing that really changed things for me was like how craft was perceived in the US. And so a lot of things, I guess, not even what I grew up with, but how what I grew up with was thought of in this country. And so craft, like people, whenever I would talk about craft, people would think about like DIY cards, like you can just put things together, or like things made out of ice cream sticks. And so people's like understanding of craft was so different from what I had grown up with, where craft and art are the same, like craftsmen and artists are the same as design, like it's the same thing. There's no difference, like people use the word interchangeably. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about how in like our undergrad crits, like the word craft would be used as, oh, that's kind of crafty, like it's like as if it's a very bad word, like this, you don't want to be associated with it if you're an artist, or she makes like crafty things, And so I was thinking about like where does that come from? Like why do we feel like this like discomfort for things that have a utility or something that is easy to make, or why do we think that craft is easy to make? And so I was thinking about all these things, and so I decided then, and I was lucky enough also to work at a museum, and so when I worked there, and then I realized that the conversation was totally different. Like how people talk about objects in a museum is so different from how we talk about it. And I was at the Met, and I was working in their textile department, and I would see all these fabrics, and how they were stored and how they were placed, and like what happens to a garment when it's on a form, and like what happens to it when we display it. Like what is our museum experience of garments? Like they're two-dimensional, like how they're spread out, and how they go from being 3D to 2D to like 3D when they're worn. And that I was very fascinated by that transformation, and just how, like if you look at these are all, I use this thing called steam-a-seam, which is you can just like glue it onto any fabric, and then you cut the piece out, and then you can glue it, and it kind of looks like when you embroider something and you actually put in effort, that's what it looks like. But this is like something that I can achieve so quickly, and so many things were happening at the same time. The museum was happening, and then I saw a few collections by, like when you're walking around Soho, you see all these like fabric shops, and I saw these collections where they had I'm stepping on my own work. When they had these dresses that had like a lot of geometric shapes, which were imitating this fabric that's behind you, like this, the red and yellow one, and it was a print of this. And this is something that's actually woven, and the way it's woven is that every single thread before it's woven is dyed individually. So the design exists even before it's woven, and then the horizontal thread goes in to make it that. And so when you print it, like this is printed, when you print that and it looks identical, like what's the value of what is woven? Like if it looks the same to you, does the value of something that's made by hand, like what is that value? You can't like quantify it. Why is that valuable? It takes up more time. Isn't that a waste of time? And like why do we find that more valuable? What is in the hand that makes something important? So thinking about all those things while also trying to teach myself how to make things by hand, how to have more control over my hand, and that's when I started like making things that like resemble garments or resemble like the museum representation of garments, and making these spaces. And I still don't know like where this is going, but those are like the thoughts that I'm those are the thoughts that I'm considering and moving with right now. Yeah. Do you have any questions? No?
Yeah. You talk about how these are a process and you're moving towards something. Could you tell us what you think you learned from making these?
From making these? So when I was making these were all on the floor. And so I was making them in my studio. I just recently I'm in a grad program now, and I just started, and I've been making things on the floor. And I realized that when you're making them on the floor, you never have to consider gravity, because everything is being pulled down already and everything is the way you want. So I usually just like cut up fabrics and I place them next to each other, and I work it's a very spontaneous process. So I look at something and I can see that something needs a triangle, or like something needs like a shape to move a certain way next to it, and so then I go and I place that fabric there, and then I cut that fabric out, and then I put it together. So it's not it's not as easy as just pasting is, because if you have to consider how you're going to stitch it, like to make this, you would have to cut everything out. So even if you are spontaneous in your placement, when you cut it, you would have to make like all the, you have to calculate every cut and then stitch it. So I just worked that way, and then I think when I installed it the night I was installing it, I was like having such a meltdown, because everything looked so different when it was being hung from the wall, and it changed the appearance completely, because everything is like sort of falling down. And so now, after doing this, I've realized that there is something that the work loses when it becomes flattened against a wall. There's something that goes away from it, where instead of it being something that you can like move around, it's something that you watch and then you can leave. And I think that's something that I was able to learn only because I did this. Like how the life something has when it's just moving by itself, whereas what happens to it when you're forcing it to be in a certain place. Yeah. Does that? Do you have?
I have a question.
Yes. Yeah.
So each of these installations is based on the kimono.
Yeah.
Each, right? Did you make the kimono first?
I did make the kimono first. Yeah, I made the kimono this January. And I was making these. So I've also, the other thing, like I think I've created these like problems for myself by going to school in the US. It's like one problem is that I have had this problem with craft which I never had before. I have a problem with the word illustration, which I never had before. Like I never thought there was any difference, and I still don't think there's any difference, but I have stopped myself from making things which I think other people will call illustrative, because here the word has, amongst fine artists, it's like I heard somebody once say that they were talking about how the Norman Rockwell painting shouldn't be in the museum because it's illustration, and I thought it was like such a bizarre thing to suggest, But so I've become very conscious of like who is looking at my work, what will they think of me? Will they think I'm not a serious artist because I'm making things that are decorative, because of the position of the decorative arts here, and so all these like thoughts, which I hopefully over the next few years, I would love to get over it, but I'm not right now. And so I was in India, which is a very safe space for making anything decorative. And I was making these paintings of kimonos, and it was just because I love pattern very much, and I love what it does to our eyes, and I love how we feel, like it suspends thought for a moment, like you can just consider how something is repeating and what happens to a shape when it repeats, like it stops being itself, but and I wanted to make that, and then and that was also because how in the museum, like how they lay clothes out, like what part do you want to show, what part do you want to hide, and that these kimonos were so beautiful on the inside as well, and that to have a life which is so luxurious where you can afford to have silk on the inside of your garment that's not even going to show, and have all this embroidered, like no one's going to see that, but you know that you're wearing something that has that, and so to make those things. And that's when I made those, and I wanted them to not just be clothes, but to be something that something else can like burst out of, that's something that is so structured, but then things can come out of it that are moving, and yeah, that's why I started with that as the center of it.
Any other questions? All right. No.
I'm curious about where something starts as a pattern and becomes a motif, or how you're playing with that. Because I see that the handmade one, for me, remains optical in a way, and the hand aspect of that may be a huge part of it. But this one here, the gold, there seems like there's some clear motifs there that I can pick up on in terms of like repetition of landscape. And maybe like a structural motif with the pyramidal shapes. And I wonder about how you define that.
The pattern that is already there versus what I make, or
how do you think about it as like an issue? It seems to me that you're doing something really particular with the motif and how you're interplaying it with the pattern.
Yeah, and it is. I think it is very like sometimes I think that it has now. I'm moving to a point where I think after some more work, I think it will become like more of like a safe space for me, because I know that there is something that putting a pattern in a place does something which is easy. Like it kind of distracts the viewer a little bit, so that you can. It's something that exists already in the world, and you can take from it and you can put it there, but it takes away the responsibility from the person who's making it, because it's like I think a triangle already exists, these drops already exist, and they are the reason they've been successful patterns throughout our time is because they are already visually appealing, and so I think it takes away responsibility from me to create something by myself that will grab that sort of attention. And so it's like a problematic thing. Like I don't know if I would make something again if I would put as an like I wonder now if I should try and do that by myself, and instead of relying on pattern as a crutch, because it's sometimes it becomes a crutch. And then even with things that are printed, it's easy to like appropriate from your own culture. If I'm Indian, I can use Indian patterns, I think, but it's more and more, I think, relying on like other people's textiles, other beauties is becoming something that I want to go away from. So especially since there's such I don't know if that's like answering your question at all, but there is such an abundance of images now. There is so much that we can look at, like every possible thing that can be photographed is photographed, and we can look at, you no longer have to travel all the way to China to find Chinese textiles or Chinese prints. And so now I think it's become even more important that we use motifs like very responsibly in new locations and in new places. So I'm not sure where I am with it, but it's I don't think I want to be as like I don't want to sprinkle them as much as I have and as I used to. Tim, is that what you were? I don't know. Is that what you were asking?
I'm very interested in the way your introduction and how you described coming into like a late capital sort of context from a socialist context.
Yeah.
To me, in a place where there's a tradition of conspicuous consumption.
Yeah.
There's also like examples of extreme autonomy. When I see pattern, I think it leaves the viewer in a place where they can continue to be autonomous, and then I see motif as having a very different relationship. So I'm very curious in how you use that. I'm very interested in your work.
I think I want to start developing things that would, I don't think it's possible to have anything uniquely yours, but I really want to start developing these shapes that would be something that comes from maybe how our first patterns came, whatever created the first, like, why the polka dots, you know, like something like a new set of polka dots that are not round, but something that comes from like that is autonomous, because right now I think a lot of it isn't. A lot of it is borrowed, because I think I borrow heavily from other cultures when I make patterns, and so I want to. And like now, you know, like the clothes that my mother wore when she was younger were all from things that were made regionally, locally. So it spoke about her and her upbringing. Whereas the clothes I'm wearing now don't speak about where I grew up or what I saw, but what my buying power is, you know. And I want to gradually move away from that and make it closer to my experience of things. But yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't thought about that until just now. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.